Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I've got a nice challenging question for us today about finance. So which investment option do you reckon is better? So the first one, you've got $2,000 and it's invested at 4%, which is compounded annually for 5 years, or option B, the same amount, $2,000, but this time it is invested at 5%. So you're getting a slightly better interest, but it's done via simple interest and for the same time period for 5 years. So let's actually learn how to calculate this and figure out what the best option is. But have a bit of a guess. Which option would you go for? Type in option A or option B on the chat box. I'll be interested to hear what you see, and let's figure out how to calculate this. So step one is let's write out our compound interest formula for the first option. So the compound interest formula is our final amount, which we call A, equals to our principal, which is your starting amount, 1 plus your rate of return as a decimal, and the full compound interest formula has the number of compound periods, which we call n. Okay, and we'll talk about what that is. And then we close brackets to the power of nt. Okay, let's quickly write out what all of these are. So A is your final amount. P is your principal. Basically what you start off your investment with. R is your rate, and it should be as a decimal. N is the number of compound periods. So the number of compound periods means how many times is interest calculated. So in this case, it says annually. So our number of compound period would be 1. If it said it is compounded daily, which is what most banks do when you get a credit card or a mortgage, then N would be 365 because that's how many days there are in a year. If it said weekly, if it's compounded weekly, N would be 52 because there's 52 weeks in a year. Do you get that? So if it's a monthly, N would be 12 because there's 12 months in a year. Biannually, so that's a bit of a tricky one. Biannually, compound periods would be 2 because there's 2 biannual periods. If it said fortnightly, your compound period is 26. So hopefully that makes sense. In this case, it's nice and easy. It's compounded annually, so N is just 1. And T is my time, and it should be in years. Okay, so now we've defined our formula. Let's plug in the values. So my final amount is my principal. So how much I started off with, which is $2,000. Depending on which country you're from, that could be £2,000, $2,000. You get the point. It's what we start off with. 1 plus my interest rate as a decimal. So 4% as a decimal is 0.04. So you're basically dividing the percent by 100, which should be quite easy to do. So 0.04 in this case. Like I said, in this case, the compound period is 1 because it's compounded annually. So you could say over 1. When the compound period is 1, you don't actually even need to include it in our formula because it gives us the same value. So we don't even need to write n is 1 to the power of n again, which is 1, so you don't need to include that. T, and it's also to the power of t, so it's n times t. T is the time, which in this case is 5. So let's plug that into my calculator. So 2000, 1 plus 0.04 to the power of 5. And that tells me I would get 2,433.31. So because it's money, make sure you round it to 2 decimal points. So money should always be rounded to 2 decimal points. So that's my final amount. If I want to know how much interest I earn, you basically do your final amount, take away how much you started off with, because the difference is obviously your interest. So if I take away 2,000 from that, I'm left with $433.31 for option 1. Okay, so it's a reasonable return on your investment for 5 years, $433 when you put in 2 grand. Looks good. Let's try option B. So option B was simple interest and it was 5% for 5 years and the same amount invested. So the simple interest formula, I'll call it SI, is principal, again what you start off with, multiplied by your rate, multiplied by your time. So that's simple interest. P again is your principal, what you start off with. R is your rate as a decimal. If you don't put it as a decimal, you may see in the formula in your books this is divided by 100, but I like to do that in my head and plug it as a decimal straight away. That way your formula is more simple. And T is just your time in years again. So let's work this out. So my principal was 2,000. My rate was slightly higher, so it was 5%. So as a decimal, that would be 0.05. And we're still investing for 5 years. So this formula works out the interest. Simple interest works out the interest, whereas the compound interest formula works out the final amount. And then you do that extra step, you subtract the principal to work out the interest. But this one would just work out the interest straight away. So let's plug this into my calculator. So 2000 times 0.05 times 5 gives me 500. So $500. So in this case, we're investing money. So we want to make the biggest return. So always look at the question. Are you like spending money? So are you paying off a home loan, a credit card, a car loan? Or, and if you're doing that, you want the smallest interest. If you're paying money, you want the smallest interest. But if you're earning money for investments, obviously you want the highest interest. So which option gives me the highest interest? It's option B. And so make sure you answer the question as well. So you got all your working out, and then you would say something like, therefore, option B is better. So a lot of people always forget to answer the final question. So did you guess that correctly when you looked at those options? Were you able to calculate it? I'm really interested to hear how that went. But hopefully you found that interesting. You learned how to calculate simple and compound interest. Let me know how you went, and thanks for watching, and I shall see you next time. Have a great day.